What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing The Missing and the Fae Part 2. Yay! So, I originally filmed this video like a week ago, but I exported it and it was corrupted. I don't know if you guys know what that means. I barely do, but I had to do it again, which is okay. Because if you guys will give me some patience, I want to go back to my old format, which took me a really long time, but I think it was worth it because a lot of you don't like when I read from the script. I'm going to try my best. If you can hear noises, I have the window open. It's a beautiful, beautiful day here in New Jersey. So let's talk about it. Lately, it just seems like the entire world has gone crazy. What about the things going on all around us in the world that we can't see? It seems like every time we turn on the TV, there's more and more destruction, there's more and more chaos, and it gets me wondering, guys, is this what they want? Is this all a very carefully carried out plan to take the focus away from the world of the unknown to make sure we don't get too close to figuring out the truth about what really goes on behind the scenes? The things the powerful elites and possible government entities who we were indoctrinated to trust basically since the time we could walk don't want us to see? What is it they're trying to distract us from? We're going to be focusing on some of that today when we talk about the bizarre disappearances in our woods, national parks, and forests. After all, the families of the missing can never be distracted into forgetting that their loved one was here one minute and poof, gone the next. In researching fairies and their connection to the people in the woods who suddenly vanish, I had a feeling inside that I came really, really close to touching on something, to lifting or at least thinning the veil that separates the actual truth from the reality we're all taught from a very young age to start believing in. In the deep, dark parts of the world's forests, national parks, and woodlands, like I just said, what is snatching and stalking helpless humans seemingly right out of existence? Come and take another walk with me as I explore the deepest depths of not only the reality we see right in front of us, but perhaps the hidden worlds of the unknown in the deepest, darkest depths of our very minds. But be careful. Don't be the first or last in line. Don't go near the boulder fields. Don't insult those you are unfamiliar with. And whatever you do, please do not turn a corner and separate from the group. Don't pick any berries. Here you are, part 2 of The Missing and the Fae. Before we begin, let's all try to get the images of the fairies we were taught about as children out of our heads. The tiny little sparkly and happy, always trying to help, and devastatingly beautiful creatures who flutter around wildly, sometimes sprinkling us with sparkly fairy dust to help us sleep. Well, maybe something like that with the sprinkling of the fairy dust and us being knocked out. I'm convinced, though, that there is something much more sinister afoot that these very small, usually ornery and not so helpful beings use to confuse and put humans to sleep so they can steal them away and take them from here that is known to there that is unknown. If only it were as simple and cutesy and fun as a little sprinkling of magic dust and bam, all of our troubles are gone, all of our problems are solved. In reality, however, it's more like sudden confusion, which causes unrelenting panic, and the hapless victim of these clever little tricksters in the blink of an eye find themselves completely lost, turned around, dazed and confused as to what just happened and where they were. Sometimes days are lost, sometimes more, and sometimes the victim is gone forever, lost to whatever game the fairy decided to make them a part of, completely helpless, alone, and afraid, screaming at the top of their lungs, but finding they have no voice. These little people aren't always so little. While the majority of them, though, are 4 foot tall or even shorter, some have said to be as tall as 7 feet. And I've even heard that they're as tall as like the old time giants, like the myths and legends of the giants that used to lurk about the canyons in places like Arizona and in the woods. You guys know what I'm talking about? I can't think of the name of the alien race. I believe they're actually fairies. Just like humans, the way they look varies drastically from one to the other, with all having different facial features and also different personalities. Let's talk about some similarities between what's going on in the woods with all of the clusters of missing people all over the world and what we know about the Fae. Circles of stone and boulder fields should never, ever be disturbed. Like, not for any reason if you can help it, because this is where they live and play, and you don't want to disturb a fairy's resting place. They don't take kindly to anything that they see as disrespectful, and as seemingly sensitive little creatures, that's most anything they don't give you permission to do. Do not even approach such places unless you are prepared for the fate that lie ahead of you, should you dare to do so. After all, how could you be granted permission to do anything by entities that you can't even see with your human eyes? And the only time you can see them is if they should choose to allow you to look upon them, and they most often than not don't give this permission. So if they ever should grant you this permission to gaze upon them, beware, be very wary, be very distrustful, for they almost always have something up their sleeves. If you don't come prepared with gifts of alcohol, sweets, and or tobacco, don't expect a very generous welcome. And actually, I would stay away from there altogether, because if you don't have these things and you disturb them, you're probably going to pay for it. You're really going to anger them. They have such great wrath for creatures that are usually so diminutive in size. There seems to be an inordinate amount of people who go missing near berry bushes. You may be struck with the unexplained need to go and fill several baskets with juicy, plump, black or huckle, red or blueberries. There are too many kinds to name that are like grow in the wild, poisonous and not poisonous. Who knows if people have been led to even eat the poisonous ones? We see all the time in movies about survival in the deep woods and forests that you should always beware of eating the berries to stay alive, for they might just be poisonous and, ironically, the very thing that kills you off. However, who do you think poisoned these berries? Mother Nature? Think again. Struck with a sudden and irresistible impulse to go and gather the fresh fruit, the fresh berries, you are most likely being lured to your doom by the Fae. They like to play, after all, and among the bushes and brambles of the berry patches is where they're known to do not only their dancing, but their mating as well. This is where they embrace the earth and sing with all of their hearts, sometimes fully visible, and most of the time at least audible to humans who are unfortunate enough to be in the general vicinity of them. If you should catch a glimpse of a dance or even the whisper of a tune, turn back, for they don't like to be disturbed. Again, they only like to be seen and heard if it's their choice, and if their choice should be taken away, there will be consequences for you. Could this be the fate of so many who disappeared among the berry patch in recent years? If you want my advice, go to your local grocer's produce section. They might not be as fresh picked, but at least you don't have to risk your life to eat them or procure them. They most likely take part in this ritual and activity by the light of the full moon, and should you stumble upon it, you just may be allowed to escape back to your home and to your family and all that is loved by you, only to lose your mind within days, as the Fae have powerful magic. Just one look into their eyes and your senses could be lost forever. With your physical body being wherever you are, while your mind is viewing their life and their world through their eyes, only you can't tell the difference. Should a fairy dressed in red approach you and slap you about the body, surely you would die. Remember, I mentioned that in part 2, and in my book I had written about this, what happened in part 1 with the little girl who angered a small fairy dressed in red, and the fairy slapped her and everyone thought she was dead. She just happened to hold on to her brother. If you didn't catch part 1, I'll try to put it up here for you. I'll put it up here somewhere. Woe to anyone who tries to remove you from their grasp, even after death. Once a fairy has claimed you, at least in their minds, you are rightfully theirs. A person looking to investigate the effect the Fae have on, or what part they play in the world of a missing, has a lot to do with which culture's legends and lore you're looking into. In order to understand the way these little people work, you must know how things are done where they're from. And I don't mean just learning how not to offend them or which treats to leave them in case you should find yourself in their bad graces. Let's explore their worlds a little bit more and see where some of these legends may have come from and what connection they could possibly have to all of these cases of missing popping up more and more frequently in today's news. In Ireland, there are many theories of origin for these devilish little creatures. We spoke in part 1 about the belief that they are fallen angels or demons, or the deceased that were unfortunately not good enough for heaven nor bad enough for hell. There is another legend, however, one seemingly as old as time, which states that the Fae are certain, quote, children of Eve, end quote. According to this Celtic myth, When Eve was in the garden after having tasted the forbidden fruits and learning she was naked, she hastily decided she must wash her children so they would be presentable in the sight of the Lord when he returned. Well, before she could wash them all, because there were so many, she heard the Lord fast approaching. She took all of the children that were left that had not been bathed, and she hid them underground, because she and her husband, and presumably in this tale their children as well, were thrown out and banned forever from the Garden of Eden because of the disobedience involving the fruit due to the trickery of the serpent. The unwashed children ended up being left behind, left underground to fend for themselves and make their own way. Obviously, leaving children to live in their own underground world with no adult supervision ever could never lead to anything good, hence how the Fae civilization was allegedly built. This fable differs a bit from time to time, with one of the ways it's being told was that God was simply angry in general for Eve not being able to keep all of her children constantly clean and presentable, and he took it as a sign of disrespect as the children were constantly in his presence and very, very dirty. Therefore, during one of these times when he had come upon the children and most of them were unwashed, he was so angry that he took all of the children who weren't clean and banished them to live underground, never being able to come up for 1,000 years. This punishment would ensure that Eve would never see them again and therefore be more diligent in washing the remaining children to make sure they were always ready and presentable to be in his sight. Either way, it seems that these children were then left underground to their own devices and to fend for themselves, eventually cultivating and growing this community of little people who are seemingly childlike, but who keep ancient and dark magic with and within them. They hold the secret to this magic very tightly and use it only when there is no other choice, like if someone should disrespect them or their territory, as previously mentioned. Another theory of the Emerald Isle is that the Fae are an ancient race that preceded even the Celts in inhabiting the land we now know as Ireland, and England too. The Celts then came in and drove the little creatures out of the land by destroying their civilizations and viciously slaughtering their people, then forcing them to go underground and take part in a one-sided revenge war for the rest of all eternity. This is why it's sometimes said that the Fae have a deep-rooted hatred for human beings, even though most modern-day legends and lore leave that part out, claiming simply that they are mischievous and mostly harmless. Either way, and no matter what you believe or which country's legends and lore you choose to set store by, they possess this ancient magic which no other human or creature possesses, and also which no one and nothing else can replicate. The last Irish legend we are going to be looking at today is one that is most widely accepted as being the possible reason for the connection for the missing phenomenon, though we will only touch the surface of it here. The legend says that the Fae are actually some form of interdimensional being whose universe has somehow bumped up against ours or intertwined with ours. This makes sense for why we sometimes can see them and then in the blink of an eye they're gone. It could also explain why once you've been selected and taken by them, you're never seen or heard from again. What is the underground to us may be the very universe for them in their world. In fact, they may not even really be going underground at all, only seeming to, as this is their way to return to their own place in time. Does that make sense? Modern-day scientists are exploring a lot of these theories as to whether or not these types of things, such as other dimensions and the ability to travel to and from them, are possible. And the general belief is that, in fact, they do exist. And while we may not have the knowledge of how to travel back and forth, either within dimensions or through time, that doesn't mean that nobody else in the entire universe doesn't. In fact, from what these scientists believe they know now in the present moment is that we humans as a species are very far behind most other dimensions and species out there, of which there are almost an infinite number when it comes to themes such as these, and also understanding quantum law and all of that other scientific blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. If maybe we could collectively understand and break it down, who knows? Maybe we can actually recover some of our people who have seemingly vanished without a trace, because after all, if all of this really turns out to be true, then it means they've just vanished from our sight, from our plane of existence, and not that they vanished forever without a trace to anywhere. Now, let's get back to our world's travels and see what some other countries have to say about where the Fae and the seemingly endless amounts of legends regarding them could have come from. In ancient times, it was well known that fairies actually cared more about humanity and what happened to human beings than most of us humans did. They were especially close with human peasants. They are known throughout the world for having cultivated a wonderful relationship with the fairies and even worked to serve the fairy queen. This was because it was believed that she, the queen, and her minions cared more about and certainly helped them more than any nobility which was ever in power. In fact, according to these legends, back in those days before being driven underground, they were just likely to live in houses in the villages right along with the humans. Sometimes without the humans' knowledge, but most times not only with their knowledge, but with their blessing as well. So humans inviting fairies in and fairies coming in, and they had this mutually beneficial relationship where the fairies would help the human and the human would help the fairies, and it was kind of like an unquestionable thing. They just helped each other. The Fae back then were known far and wide among the poorer classes and peasants as an ally and as helpful little people who would use enchantment to keep certain towns, villages, or even individual houses where they were welcomed and accepted, safe from the ravages of the many wars back then, and also from so many other deadly things someone from those times could come across that could kill them on a regular basis. I mean, think back to medieval times. You can just turn a corner and you would die. I mean, things are really dangerous back in the Middle Ages, back in the Renaissance, back whenever. Still really dangerous today, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. So the Fae were very protective of their humans, to kind of put it that way because it's pretty accurate, back then. And they would do anything to protect them just as if it was their own, as if it were another Fae. Some of the things the Fae did were make medicines with their magic to keep the villagers from becoming sick with one pandemic or another. And sometimes they would even return a child from death. But that would be if the price is right, and there was always too large a consequence for both sides. I didn't find out what that consequence is, but I can only imagine. The fairies did not do this often, but they were known to make entire villages invisible to keep them safe from an approaching torch mob or an angry mob or army. Remember how long ago this was, and please don't give it much thought should you ever run into or encounter a fairy or one of their many dwelling places. Though we're not entirely sure why this mutually beneficial relationship has changed so drastically throughout the centuries, throughout the ages, right? We can be quite sure that it has, and that's really all we need to know. It's said that humans have simply just moved on or seem to have forgotten how essential they once were to the survival of our very species. And because of this, some of the Fae now seek revenge, unwilling to be used and then tossed aside like some kind of old rag. The disrespect they feel and the disdain they have towards the human race, at least in some fairy cultures, and yes, they do have different cultures which hold different beliefs and act in different ways. Some choose to live on the edges of our vision, wanting to just go about peacefully, nothing but peace, and to just stay out of the way of us altogether. Then there are the other kind, the kind that we're going to start discussing right now. Keep in mind always that regardless of how their feelings towards humanity have either evolved or devolved throughout the centuries, all fairies are known to be either a bit or almost completely devilish in nature. It's something they can't help, even if they should want to. They can be extremely benign or extremely dangerous, with the latter being akin to even vampires, literally sucking the life force out of any human it should encounter and using the ancient magic in its being to disappear any of the evidence, perhaps back to its own dimension. Let's move on to discussing the many different types of encounters one could possibly have with a fairy. If there's one thing almost all of the legends about them have in common, is that they are enforcers of morality, which is why they live so much by the code of mutual respect. They will often appear to test a person's generosity and kindness. When I think about the missing phenomenon, I think of the young children who go missing without a trace, and I wonder, after exploring this type of encounter deeper, if the Fae know the difference between the mind of an adult human and the mind of a child's human. Keep this question in mind as we move forward. Keep the encounters that are known to be had and the types of people who most go missing in mind, and see if you can't figure out, possibly, which encounter each group of the missing may have had to experience in order to fail the test and end up missing to this world or to this plane of existence forever. During such encounters, the fairy will often disguise itself as a beggar or some other person who is in desperate need of something you possess. Those who help out and are kind and generous will receive many blessings. For example, being let out of the woods if they should happen to be turned around or lost. But if you are unkind and not helpful at all, and perhaps show some kind of disdain for the pathetic fellow whose form it has chosen, then woe to you. You will face dire consequences, sometimes even the loss of your very life. Perhaps even worse, you might be led to be invisible to the human eye and left to wander about, circling the same part of the woods or forest again and again in some kind of enchantment where there is never a way out. perhaps even to stay like this for all of eternity with your loved ones or even the authorities right within your reach, only you will forever be unable to grasp them. Fairies are known to bury entire villages in avalanches or drown them in floods because of just one bad encounter with one unsympathetic human who very well could have been the nicest person in the world, but was just having a bad day at the point that they met this fairy. The second type of encounter one might have is when a fairy chooses you to help them carry out some type of work that they need done. Should you accept and help the fairy, again, you will receive some sort of blessing, although you quite possibly won't have any memory of the encounter or the work which you helped them carry out anyway. However, if you should refuse, you could very well be driven into madness, a madness that some might say is worse than even death itself. Keep in mind always, despite the intention of the little person you encounter, they have a spitefulness and mean streak deeply ingrained into them, especially when it comes to the human race who so callously abandoned them once they were released from the throes of poverty and destitution of ancient times. In this modern world, to most, they are nothing more than fairy tale creatures, and obviously this offends them greatly. Some cultures, even to this day, believe that this is where mental illness comes in. Remember how we established fairy used to live side by side in the same home as humans, and some of them still choose to visit a home from time to time. In fact, some hauntings can even be attributed to simply an offended little person. Poltergeist activity, most of the time, in my opinion, knowing what I know through all of my research, is every once in a while, not all of the time and not most of the time, but every once in a while, a fae problem. A fairy will sit invisible on the shoulder of a person deemed mad or insane and torment them day and night without rest or sleep, essentially driving them into early graves or mental institutions where they'll never get any better. Always make sure to return a favor given to you by a fairy. They will sometimes show up to offer help when it's most needed at some points in a human's life, perhaps while grieving the loss of a loved one or while in some kind of health crisis. The little person will use the ancient magic in them to heal the person or provide a deep sense of peace and comfort. They do these things, for the most part, without asking for permission, so technically you accept without even knowing it. Then you are forever indebted to the fae and all the bad luck and misfortune you will find should you not repay these favors immediately when being called upon to do so. As we've already discussed, there are just as many types of fairies as there are human beings. Some are inherently helpful and kind, while some are infinitely evil and downright deadly. The latter type are known to target specific humans, usually for the smell of their blood is appealing to the devilish little fiend, or for some other type of reason we have neither way of knowing nor controlling. This type will seek a person out simply to drink its blood, torment it, or, and here is where the mind might wander to the missing, take the human as an eternal slave. After all, just because they are much more diminutive in size than us humans, remember how strong their magic is. We as a species seem to have lost most, if not all, of that ancient magic, and therefore the fae are much more powerful in every single conceivable way than we are. They may not be able to overtake us with strength alone, but make no mistake, they are much stronger mentally and magically, and are a most formidable opponent I certainly wouldn't want to mess with. When going through all of this, my mind can't help but wander to all of the intellectuals who are known to go missing on a random hunting, hiking, and or camping trip. Could it be that the fae creatures have happened upon randomly or specifically hunted down these extremely intelligent human beings, for they have grown bored of playing with intellectually inferior humans that they normally encounter? Perhaps they enjoy the mental sparring so much they choose to keep this human with them forever, using it as some sort of sick plaything to see how long it takes to mentally break such a smart human being, such a smart person, down to their most basic form of caveman mentality, thus draining the human slave/toy of all of its intelligence, right down to its most basic human knowledge of the world and itself over a period of possibly centuries, all the while keeping it hidden from other humans and feeding off of its life force. This is until inevitably the human being dies, and the fairy must then move on to see what it sees as bigger and better challenge in the form of another human who may be even smarter and more intellectually advanced than its last pet. Keep in mind, while discussing all of these theories, that time passes differently for the fae. What seems like centuries to us is mere minutes or even seconds to them. My advice, keep some kind of iron on you at all times and make sure it's clearly visible when traveling about, especially in the deep woods. This is one of the only things known throughout all cultures to even be remotely successful at keeping fairies at bay. One of the many still subconsciously known and perhaps deeply ingrained powers of humanity is our ability to use symbols and objects to break other species or beings. Not sure which word to use here. It's magical powers, especially when those powers are dark and turned directly towards us. Perhaps it's magic, or maybe it's just an uncanny knack for getting rid of curses and hexes. The same is true when it comes to warding off the fae. Let's talk now about symbols and objects that are known to break magical power, including all of the magic of the fae. These include, but aren't limited to, rabbit's feet, inside-out clothing, crosses, and believe it or not, pictures of a Japanese empire have all been known to successfully prevent further or initial attacks on humans. Some of you may be familiar with these things, some of you may be familiar with some of it, but not all of it, and either way, it's definitely something we should all know, especially those of us who spend any time at all in the woods or forests. Let's be honest, though, to any of us who spend any time in our own backyards, if we live near woods or forests. And as far as that Japanese empire, that's all I could find. I don't know which Japanese empire. I don't know why a Japanese emperor. I just know that's what it said in like a ton of research. First of all, those of us who know how to use the evil eye are in luck, as this is said to be one of the most effective ways to injure a fairy and defend ourselves during an attack, either on the mind or the body. And if you don't know what that is, I will try to put a picture, but I wear one on my arm pretty much all the time, and that is warding off evil, magic, hexes, all that kind of good stuff. The evil eye is second in winning us victory in this way only to non-galvanized iron. It is said that some races can't even be looked upon by humans without being injured who are wearing either the evil eye, like a necklace or a bracelet, or other races can't use their magic against us when presented with this evil eye either. So if you aren't aware of what this is or how to effectively use it, maybe you should learn. Unless a fairy has attached itself to you as a familiar, and trust me, you will definitely know if this has happened, never accept its hospitality. It's completely impossible to tell the difference between a well-meaning and helpful fairy who cares deeply about humanity and an evil one who is pretending so it can lure you into its web for either the reason of making you a slave or a snack. Trust me when I say you won't know until it's far too late and you have no out. You don't have to verbally accept anything or even acknowledge these small, seemingly benign and insignificant gestures of so-called hospitality either. All you have to do is anything other than clearly stating the word no. Remember, though, not to be offensive or insulting in any way unless you are prepared for a fight. Once you have danced with, accepted food from, or even allowed a fairy to brush your hair, yes, they like doing that, you are in their complete and total debt, so be sure and keep your wits about you and don't be fooled. The nice, helpful, and friendly type of fairy are far harder to come by, as humanity and its wars and destruction of the very forest they make their homes in is definitely on almost all species of fae's naughty list, and many of them are just aching for some type of revenge. Keep in mind here, too, that even if the fairy wishes no ill intent towards you and has no plans to kill or enslave you for accepting these gestures of goodwill from them, even if the gestures are genuine, in a lot of cases, and really it depends on the fae, and again, if you're not really knowledgeable, how would you ever know? Because one fae could turn into another different kind of fae, which we'll talk about further down the line. So once you accept, you're automatically in one of the fairy realms and no longer in our worlds, depending again on the species. In that case, even if the fairy you're canoodling with means you no harm, once in their realm, it will be all the more harder for you to protect yourself against any attacks from the more vengeful and bloodthirsty type. So unless the fairy is a familiar of yours, and again, this doesn't simply mean you know it well or it's your friend, I'm talking more like a witch's familiar here, like a black cat or an owl or something, it will be unable to, and more often than not, very unlikely to protect you while in their realms. They will face dire consequences and repercussions simply for befriending you and offering the said hospitality to you, and could face certain death from fairies higher up than them in the realm than they are. They will never be willing to risk or sacrifice themselves for you. Not to protect you, not to shield you, not nothing. They could even be compelled to join in your torture, and make no mistake that they will too if it means saving themselves. So it's basically impossible to return to our world or realm once we've entered the fairies' world or realm in a lot of cases. Again, I have to keep saying in a lot of cases, in most cases, because it's so different, and our knowledge of them is growing and changing as really days go by and more people continue to research this type of stuff. So we could be forever lost, possibly as a story in someone's Missing in the Woods video here on YouTube. There's also the chance you will just waste away, whether or not you could get back had you eaten or danced with these little beings. Many a human has been known to wander between realms, never again experiencing happiness or pleasure, not even on the smallest scale after having dined, danced, or spent time with the Fae. Many of the opinion fairies are directly responsible for many, if not most, of the missing phenomenon in the woods and forest encounters will tell you that sometimes it's just a twist of fate or bad luck to have stumbled upon a fairy or its colony. It can happen, and more often than not does, that without the human or the fairy even planning on it at all, the human will stumble upon it or into their paths, or their paths will somehow cross. In this case, it's best not to try and reason with them or explain yourself, as this is when, throughout history, humans have been most well known to be actually trying to steal the fairies' treasures. It's best to just apologize and move along as quickly as possible, provided that it is they allow you to. Perhaps when in the forest, keep a bit of alcohol, tobacco, or sweets with you in case something like this should happen. You're more likely to be allowed to leave in one piece if you can give them a gift, a peace offering, if you will. There are certain times, though, granted very, very limited in nature, that a fairy may truly be in need of human assistance and will therefore honestly try and hire you to do some work for them. Examples may include when their colony somehow comes under attack, say by a deity or a ghost spirit who wishes to overtake it, cause general mischief, or even kill and overthrow the fairy queen. The fairies will then seek to employ a human being to draw a cross on the trees where they've made their homes. This somehow allows the Fae to stay safely hidden in the trees without being seen by whatever the other entity is. I don't know how it works. I'm not full Fae. Keep in mind, though, that this can be an extremely dangerous job for the humans, as these other beings can also, as most of us know, either possess, cause harm to, stalk, or even kill us or our loved ones. We're talking about demons, negative, lower vibrational entities, deities, you know, all of these horrible things that we ourselves fear more than the Fae, which we shouldn't. We should fear the Fae just as much, but still, it's leaving us at their mercy. The fairies are all but defenseless against them, which is why they need us in the first place. However, if you should succeed in helping the fairies to hide from these mortal enemies and help to save and preserve their colony and queen, you will be rewarded as you would from a Germanic woodwife, which is with a bag full of lovely, scented, beautiful wood chips. Be sure to thank and graciously accept this payment, as it said that as soon as you leave the forest with this treasure, that is indeed what it becomes, as the chips turn to pure gold. Each piece another gold piece. There are stories of mean-spirited and ungrateful humans who have gone out of their way to do this work for the Fae people and refuse to accept the gift of the wood chips, feeling as though the saving of their kind should have earned them more than a small little bag of chips. This did not work out well for that person, needless to say, as they are said to now roam the forest where they committed this slight against the fairies, and they're left as mere phantoms, not knowing whether they're coming or going, never knowing themselves or anything of space and time again. A perpetual circle in the forest, left like prey to any and all other creatures and entities that roam those same forests, a sheep perpetually being led to some horrible fate and definite slaughter. Oh, and if you should be so unlucky as to stumble across a fairy child, just do your best to help it find its way, regardless of how mischievous and ungrateful and petulant it might be. You may or may not get anything for your troubles, though. It depends on the relationship its parents have with the human race, whatever their experiences may have been, good or bad. However, if you refuse to help or insult the child in some way, again, woe to you, as you will end up in the aforementioned perpetual phantom state as well. And finally, fairies most often will seek the help of certain humans, depending on your aura field, which they can see very easily, to clean their fields, birth their children, guard their queen, and watch their fairy cattle. It just said cattle, but if they're fairy, would be fairy cattle, or do they grow like actual moo cows? Should you do a good job, you will earn the wage of gold or the relief from something that is ailing you. The fairies are known to not only be the cause of, but to be able to cure most human aches and pains, but also some diseases as well. Regardless of what the payment is, you are encouraged to just accept the tasks asked of you by the Fae. Do not try and find out the pay or reward in advance, as this is considered to be rude. As a rule, fairies themselves are generally hardworking and consider it abhorrent behavior for anyone to refuse a hard day's work, regardless of what the pay might be. Remembering we're also speaking of the mysterious missing here, I'd be remiss not to remind you that if you do not know by sight or sound which fairies you are dealing with, it's best to be extremely careful not to stumble upon them in general. Like, look down when you're walking if you have to. That could leave you at the mercy of the ones in the trees. Guys, I don't know. I'm trying to help here. There are some races of the Fae, the Baba Yaga for one, who will hire a human with the promise of great reward. Then they go on to give them impossible tasks to complete, so the end of the day sees much punishment, possibly enslavement, which is going missing in our human realm, for as long as this Baba Yaga Fae sees fit. Is this what happened to the very few who have gone missing in the forest for long stretches of time only to return, either not remembering or not being willing to speak of where they had been the whole while? Perhaps we'll never know. After all, the Fae are known to be quite tight-lipped, and regardless of how friendly one species may be towards human, as we say, blood is thicker than water, and at the end of the day, most of the Fae will stick with their own kind. I wanted to reiterate some of what we should have taken from this story today, as my concern for the missing in the woods is ever growing. The more I myself learn about these little creatures of lore known as the Fae, keep in mind that they generally are not the wish-granting, super cute and sparkly little lovers portrayed in fairy tales and children's bedtime stories. They are nasty and ill-tempered with a great love of abducting humans. It's one of their favorite pastimes, actually, and the stalking of the prey is what they enjoy most, almost more than the actual abduction and enslavement itself. Pointing back to the missing phenomenon and all of the unfortunate disappearances there, let's take a look now at some of the correlation between the parameters that are set up and how almost all of them can somehow be traced back to the Fae and their fiendish little pastimes. Storms and weather events. Fairies are nature spirits and can control the elements, mainly water and storms. In the cases of the missing, search and rescue are often stopped and put on indefinite hold because of some inclement weather event. We know that, right? If you were a fairy and had abducted some poor unsuspecting human, would you not use all of your power over the elements to keep said human from being found before you could escape back to your realms with it? Keeping in line with the elemental facts of possible fairy involvement in these missing cases, I point you now to the boulder fields and bodies of water found in the areas where a lot of these people went missing from. In folklore, bodies of water, particularly streams and brooks found in most forests and national parks, are known to belong to elemental beings, which the Fae definitely are, and the element they manipulate the most is thought to be some by water. Boulder fields, on the other hand, are known all over the world as the domains of the Fae. It's kind of common knowledge at this point if you've even begun research on them. You'd be hard-pressed to find a fairy legend where they did not have dominion over all of the boulder fields and small bodies of water in every single wood and forest throughout the world. Probably the universe. Not only in the cases of the missing phenomenon, missing persons, but also in UFO and Bigfoot/cryptid literature, you will find a general refusal from most animals, search dogs in particular, to venture into woods that once they would have explored without hesitation. These dogs are usually trained to search and rescue and hunt. However, in so many cases of the missing, we find that the canines just absolutely refuse to do the job they were born and trained to do. A job which at any other time they loved to do and couldn't wait to do. The dogs are scared. Plain and simple, and looking into much fairy folklore, you will see precisely why this happens. This behavior is not only rife in fairy lore, but also becoming more and more common in each missing person's case we come across where a search and rescue canine was employed. The same is true for the missing pets who unfortunately accompanied them out into the wilderness and most likely witnessed the fairy abduction itself. It saw it with its own eyes and freaked out. The dogs are afraid of the Fae, as, I reiterate, they are nasty and mean little creatures and can put a definite hex of confusion on the poor mutt, making it chase and bite its own tail, sometimes going so far as to invisibly injure the animal. That's right, they use fairy magic and play a game with their children, sort of like the human version of piñata, only with magical needles that make the animal bleed but leave no mark. I won't even explain further. I'll let you use your own imaginations on that. The next connection I want to help you guys understand is one that I find the most creepy of all, the disembodied sounds heard by search and rescue people and volunteers. They will hear disembodied screams for help or moaning sounds of pain coming from somewhere, from nowhere in the wilderness. So what's the issue? The sounds are the voices of the missing individual they are currently out searching for. The person is already enslaved by the time the searchers come to the rescue. Remembering the inclement weather and refusal of animals to hunt, which buys the fairies more time to capture its victim, and perhaps to hunt them and have their fun for a little while longer as well. By the time the fairy lifts all of these magics, it's too late. Though the victim hasn't figured out yet and still clings to the hope he or she will be heard, not knowing they are already lost forever, doomed to a life of slavery worse than anything imaginable, worse even than our own human deaths. Have you guys ever wondered why some people turn up dead and some are lost forever, never to be found, not hide or hair of them? Well, the explanation for this is actually quite simple for anyone familiar with the Fae and their ways. See, it's all about usefulness. Who of the humans will pose the biggest challenge to them? They don't, for example, want to hunt someone who isn't going to give them a run for their money. This is also why people who are extremely smart and very athletic, even avid hunters, are never found and lost in the blink of an eye. The Fae want a challenge. After they've played enough, it's time to test the human's intellectual strength and or physical prowess, depending on their particular need for that particular slave for that particular day. If the person proves to be useful, either physically, intellectually, or both, the Fae will keep them. If not, they will be killed and returned to our dimension, to our realm, if you will. The reason places are searched dozens of times just for the person to turn up days later in the exact same spot is because the Fae were kind of interviewing them, if you will. But not for a job. Oh, no. They were being interviewed for what kind of slave they'd best make in the fairy realm. After it's decided if they're useful, they will be magically transported to one of these realms, never to be seen or heard from again on our plane of existence. Every once in a while, a mischievous and especially cruel fairy, usually a child or a young adult, will place articles of clothing here and there simply to watch the searchers find it and get a renewed sense of hope, then stand by for days watching and waiting until they see those hopes suddenly dashed upon the realization that they're not going to find anything more than these little scraps of items for the missing person. One of the many, many reasons, so don't think I'm stopping here because I revisit this in future videos, okay? For the constant and seemingly random shoe finding. The one shoe, sometimes two, but usually one. Simple. The Fae are extremely clean folk and shoes are very, very dirty, especially after someone who has been chased through the woods. The final focus in some of these missing persons cases I want to discuss is the berry picking. This is the simplest of all explanations, which is why I chose to do it last. Berries that grow in the forest are considered by fairies to be their own food. They love the delicious and plump seasonal fare that grows all over some bushes, usually near the water. They collect and store them in case of a shortage of human blood that year, maybe, I don't know. And therefore, to simply pick a berry, let alone dare to taste or eat it, is considered thievery to the Fae and will be punished by eternal enslavement and possible death. Guys, that is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it made a lot of sense to you guys. This is, as you guys know, my favorite subject to research right now. I mean, I have a ton of favorite subjects, as you can tell by my many series, right? Which I am working on getting some more out. So if you enjoyed spending this time with me, please give this video a big thumbs up. I want to see my likes get as high as my views, or at least almost there. Come on, guys. Let's have a little evening out. Spread the love by sharing this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I definitely appreciate it. If you all wouldn't mind checking out the description box for some important links, the 3 live streams Steve Stockton and I do every week go stemma. On Friday nights, we have Campfire Stories from 7 to whenever p.m. Eastern Time on Missing Persons and Mysteries. It's stemma, but with a panel of people talking about all kinds of paranormal, supernatural things and stuff and things, as I always like to say. And on Sunday nights, we have Fireside Chat from 7 to 8 or 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where we basically talk about pretty much nothing, our week, whatever you guys want to talk about, upcoming cases, things going on. Wednesday nights, right here on the Gemma Jade channel, from 7 p.m. Eastern Time to 10 or 11, however long it takes us to finish, p.m. Eastern Time, we are doing 1-card oracle readings for anyone in the live stream. Also, as always, justice for Caleb Smith, and I am really hoping to have new information for you going forward. Support stemma, stand with stemma. I love you guys so much. Also in the description box, my PayPal and Patreon information if you want to make a financial donation to the channel, and my Amazon link for my work stuff, oracle decks, things for my background, things for my new office, all things going back into the channel. You guys have been asking for that link for quite a while, and I finally figured out how to do it. If you have any experiences with the supernatural and or paranormal, please be sure also check out the description box where you'll find my email, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Send it to me, whether you just want to talk about it privately or hopefully you would like to let me share it in my Listener Encounters series, which I'm hoping to film another one this weekend. Yay! So much coming up, guys. I know that I've been lagging a little bit behind, but I'm trying to make the channel bigger, trying to make the channel better, trying to make you guys happier. I love you guys so much. Be kind to each other. Be kind to yourselves. And I appreciate all of the constant support. You never know what someone else is going through. Smile at a stranger. Always go in grace. Have your best day, have your best night, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.